Welcome back. If you're new here, settle in. You picked a good night. Something about this particular week has felt slightly off, hasn't it? Not dramatically wrong. Just a small thing. A door you could swear you locked. A light already on when you get home. A face on the street that you recognized but couldn't place. Those are the kinds of details tonight is built around. Not the screaming kind of horror. The quiet kind. The kind that takes root in ordinary life and stays there tonight. We have 7 stories. They come from a rural Japanese countryside, a Romanian apartment block, an American highway, a Brazilian village, a late-night Seoul office, a Scottish farmhouse, and a crowded building in Mumbai. Different places, different people, but the same basic wrongness underneath all of them. Something that does not belong, fitting itself in perfectly until one detail gives it away. If you've been here before, thank you for coming back. If you want to stay, the subscribe button is right there. This channel is a place people return to. I hope it becomes one you return to too. Lower the lights, put your earbuds in, and let's begin. The figure had learned the wave. My grandmother died in October. I went back to Yamanashi in November to sort the house. I'm a school librarian. I was at the time, and I had 3 weeks of personal leave saved up. I'm careful with things like that. I keep records. So I took the full 3 weeks, drove out to the village, and set myself up in my grandmother's house to go through 40 years of her belongings room by room. The house sits at the end of a narrow lane, maybe 200 meters from the next nearest property. That house belonged to a man named Tanaka. He was 78 when I last saw him at my grandmother's 60th birthday, which would have made him somewhere in his mid-80s by the time I returned. My grandmother always spoke of him warmly. They'd been neighbors for 50 years. She brought him vegetable broth in winter. He looked after her mail when she traveled. I arrived on a Sunday. It was cold. The mountains were already holding snow up high. I carried my bags in, turned the heat on, and went to the kitchen to make tea. Through the kitchen window I could see the lane, and I could see Tanaka-san walking his usual route along the edge of the lane heading away from the village. Same khaki trousers, same dark jacket, same posture, slightly forward, slightly careful, like a man who has learned to trust his balance one step at a time. I tapped the window. He raised one hand without turning. I recognized it immediately. He always did that. He raised his hand toward you when he heard you, before he turned to look. It was such a specific gesture that I smiled without thinking about it. I had tea. I started on the storage room. I didn't think about Tanaka again that evening. The next 3 days passed with the ordinary misery of sorting through a dead person's home. My grandmother had been systematic. She labeled boxes, kept receipts, organized her photographs chronologically. But there was still 40 years of it, and it was still hers. And every 3rd box made me put things down and sit with my hands in my lap for a while. On the 4th day, I saw Tanaka again. Same time, roughly, same walk. I'd started taking my lunch break at the kitchen table because the light was good, and the lane was visible, and the movement of something living was a comfort. I watched him walk the route. He moved more slowly than I remembered, but that was age. He was in his mid-80s. I should have been relieved he was still moving at all. This time he stopped. He stopped at the point in the lane directly in front of my grandmother's gate, and he stood there for what I measured as approximately 3 minutes. I counted because I noticed the behavior was unusual. He stood with his back to me. He did not look up at the house, he did not turn. He simply stopped, stood, and then began walking again at the same pace as before. I set it aside. Old men stop. They rest. Their joints ache and they don't want to admit it, so they pretend they're simply looking at something. I returned to the storage room. I saw him 5 more times across the following week. Same route, same time. Sometimes he raised his hand. Sometimes he stopped at the gate. On the 8th day, I decided I would go out and speak to him. It felt right. I should have already introduced myself, explained I was Mitsuko's granddaughter, checked that he was well. I put my coat on. By the time I got to the lane, he was gone. I walked to the point where I had seen him stop. There was nothing there. The lane was empty in both directions. I walked down to the village the next morning to find the small grocery where my grandmother always bought pickled vegetables. The woman behind the counter was about my age, and she recognized me immediately from photographs my grandmother had shown around. We talked for some time. I mentioned that I'd seen Tanaka-san walking past the house. She looked at me the way people look at you when they aren't sure how to answer. "Tanaka-san," I said again. "My grandmother's neighbor, the one in the house at the end of the lane." She said yes, she knew who I meant. She said he had died. About 2 years ago, she thought. Maybe a little less. His daughter had come to close the house. I assumed the way you do, that I'd simply misidentified someone. A relative, a walker, a coincidence of clothing and posture. I said that to the shopkeeper. I said there must be someone else who walks that route. She said she didn't know of anyone. I went back to the house. I told myself, stranger in similar clothes observed through a window, memory filling in the rest. I was tired. I was grieving. I had my grandmother's life spread across the floor in labeled boxes. My brain was pattern matching without permission. I kept working. I did not go back to the kitchen window at lunchtime. On the 15th day, I was sorting through my grandmother's writing desk. She kept everything. Notes from the market, cards from former students, printed emails she'd chosen to keep for reasons I couldn't always identify. At the back of the deepest drawer, I found a small diary. Not old, the spine was still clean. The date on the first page was 4 years ago. My grandmother was not a diary keeper. This was unusual. I read it. It was spare. She wrote about the garden, about her health, about the price of winter squash. She wrote about missing my mother. She wrote about the light in January. None of it was the kind of writing you expect to find in a drawer. It didn't feel like she was working through anything. It felt like she was recording things, like she was keeping a log. About a third of the way through, her entries began to change tone. She wrote that she had seen Tanaka walking the lane again. She found this comforting. She had liked Tanaka. She missed him. She thought it must be a relative staying in the house. She waved. She wrote that she had stopped waving. The next entry was 2 weeks later. It said only, "I stopped waving because of how he waved back. Tanaka used to raise his hand before he turned. This one waits until I have already waved, and then it raises its hand in the same way. But it is waiting to see what I do first." I sat with that entry for a long time. I thought about the kitchen window. I thought about the day I tapped the glass and the figure raised its hand without turning, without waiting. It had been watching long enough that it no longer needed to wait. The last entry in the diary was dated 8 months before my grandmother died. It said, "I keep the curtains closed now on the kitchen side. I don't wave. I don't look. It walked past again this morning. It stopped at the gate for a long time. I think it is trying to understand why I stopped. I left Yamanashi the following morning. I did not finish sorting the house. I never looked out the kitchen window before I left. I don't know whether I was being careful or whether I already knew what I would see. I don't wave at strangers anymore. If someone raises a hand at me, I wait to see whether they do it before or after they've seen me move. I know that's not a normal thing to track, but I track it now every time." The 13th Shadow, I worked night security in a block of flats in Cluj for about 2 years. Older building, Soviet era, 12 floors, 12 units per floor. I did the same rounds every night. You get a feel for a building. You know which elevator is slow, which stairwell door sticks, which unit has the dog that barks at nothing. Floor 7 had 12 units. I know that because I counted them on my first week, 12 doors, 12 units. 12 little slices of light or darkness underneath each door, depending on whether anyone was home and awake. I'm embarrassed to even say how long it took me before I counted again. It was maybe 4 months in. I was doing the floor 7 round. It was around 2 a.m., and something about the pattern of light was wrong. I stood in the hallway and counted the lines of light under the doors. The light didn't matter. Some people kept all their lights on, some had blackout curtains, but something was off, so I counted the gaps. The space between floor and door, the dark ones 13, I counted again, 13 dark gaps, 12 doors. I stood there in the hallway, and I counted the actual doors this time, 12. Then I counted the dark gaps again, 13. I wrote it off. Light plays tricks on you at 2 a.m. I had a bad angle, a warped door, a gap in the baseboard somewhere. I didn't write it in the log. I didn't say anything to anyone. I was honestly embarrassed that I'd even noticed. You don't want to be the security guard who reports ghosts. A few months later, a new guy started. He was doing floor 7 orientation with me, and partway through the hallway he stopped and said, "Does this floor look right to you?" I asked what he meant. He said he'd been counting doors and he kept getting the same answer, and it didn't look right to him. He didn't say what answer. I didn't ask. He lasted 6 weeks and left for another job. I don't know if floor 7 had anything to do with it. About a year after that, I was checking out of a shift, turning in the logbook, and the supervisor mentioned offhand that I'd been marking floor 7 incorrectly. I asked what she meant. She said I had been writing 12 secure, 1 unaccounted, every night for 11 months. I had not been writing that. I had been writing 12 secure, all clear, except it was in my handwriting. She showed me it was definitely my handwriting. I finished out my contract and found different work. I don't think about floor 7 very often. But when I do, I try not to wonder what I was actually counting. But when I do, I try not to wonder what I was actually counting. But when I do, I try not to wonder what I was actually counting. But when I do, I try not to wonder what I was actually counting. But when I do... The exit was not on any map. I've been driving long haul for 11 years. Chicago to Youngstown. Youngstown to Columbus. Columbus back up. I know those roads the way you know a room in the dark without thinking about it. Without needing to, I want to be clear about that before I tell you what happened. Because I know how it sounds, and I know the first thing anyone thinks is, he was tired, he got confused, he took a wrong exit. I've heard that. I don't argue with it anymore. I just say, okay, and then I stop talking. It was early March, a night run, fully loaded trailer. I'd done this specific route 40 or 50 times. I know where the mile markers are. I know where the way station is and what time it closes. I know the fast food that's open past midnight and the ones that just leave the signs lit to be cruel. I was about an hour and 40 out from Columbus when I passed a sign for an exit called Kellersburg. Rest area and fuel, it said. I know that road. There is no Kellersburg exit. I checked the GPS. According to the GPS, I was already 22 miles past the location that sign should have been. That happens. GPS is wrong sometimes. Signs are old, roads are renumbered. I kept driving. 40 minutes later, I passed the Kellersburg sign again. Same sign, same wording. Rest area and fuel. The GPS said I was now 40 miles past my starting position, proceeding normally. No exit. No sign, just the display and my dashboard and the dark road ahead. I pulled off. The next time I saw anything, a diner, still lit, just past an interchange, and I called dispatch. I told them my GPS position and asked if anything strange was showing on their end. The dispatcher was a woman named Val, and she checked the system and said my truck's GPS ping was showing me already within Columbus city limits. She said, "You sure you didn't lose track of time?" I was sure. She said, "You feeling okay?" I said yes. She said my load was already logged as in transit. My estimated delivery time was tracking fine, and if I was at the position I said I was, I should be back in range within 10 minutes. She was wrong by almost an hour, but the delivery timestamp at the Columbus dock has me arriving at the correct window. The dock manager signed off at exactly the time I should have been there if I'd never stopped, if I'd driven the route without anything happening. I went back to the diner. I sat for a while. I bought coffee. I didn't touch. I got in the truck and drove to the depot and went home. 3 days later, I remembered the dashcam. We run continuous dashcam on all vehicles. I requested my own footage from that night for the window in question. The footage shows my truck pulling into the Columbus dock at 2:41 a.m. The dock manager is there. The trailer gets unhooked. All of this is on the forward-facing camera. I watched it 3 times. I'm not in any of it. Not in the cab, not stepping out. I know it's my truck because I can read my own plate. I know it's that night because the timestamps match, and I can see the dock manager's face, and the weather matches what I remember. But the cab is dark when the door should be opening. The door opens by itself. The engine cuts. Nobody steps down. I drive that route every 2 weeks. I've never seen the Kellersburg sign again. I've asked 2 other drivers who know that stretch. Neither of them has ever seen it. I keep the dashcam footage on a drive at home. My wife asked me once why I don't just delete it. I don't have a good answer for that. It's mine, I guess. Whatever it is, it belongs to that night. And that night happened to me. The cross above the door. I'll keep this short because I'm not someone who goes in for long explanations, especially not about things I still don't fully accept happened. I was in my mother's hometown in Minas Gerais for her uncle's funeral. City kid, no patience for folk beliefs. I thought the whole trip would be 3 days of my relatives giving me rules about things I didn't understand. And it was, but one of those rules was different. An old woman, I never caught her name. She was just there at the wake like she'd always been there. Pressed a small wooden cross into my hand and told me to hang it above the inside of the door of whatever room I slept in, and not to take it down before first light. The cross was simple, rough, hand-carved. It had a small hook at the top. I hung it up. I'm not completely disrespectful at about midnight. It was in my way. The door hit it every time it swung open, and it made a noise, and I couldn't sleep. I took it down and set it on the windowsill. At around 3 a.m. I woke up because something was saying my name outside the window. My mother's voice, exactly my mother's voice. But my mother was 40 meters away in the main house, and there was no reason she'd be outside my window at 3 a.m. The voice said my name twice, then went quiet, then said it again, patient, like it was waiting for me to answer. I did not answer. I did not answer. I got up and hung the cross back above the door. I sat in the chair and did not sleep. By around 5 a.m. it was getting light and nothing happened again. In the morning I went to find the old woman. She looked at the cross for a moment, specifically at the lower screw, which had stripped when I'd taken it down in a hurry. She said, "You took it down." I asked how she could know. She said, "Because it answered you. I don't know what the answer would have been. I don't want to know." The answer would have been, I don't want to know. I drove back to the city that afternoon and I did not stay for the rest of the gathering. I still have the cross. I don't hang it anywhere. I keep it in a drawer. The badge that still worked, I want to say up front, that I documented all of this at the time. Dates, times, printer logs, access records. I'm an auditor. Documentation is how I think. So when I tell you what I found, I'm not telling you what I remember. I'm telling you what the records say. I work for an insurance company in Seoul. Late nights, high-rise building, fluorescent lighting. The specific silence that fills an office after 9 p.m., when most people have gone home. I like those hours. I stayed late habitually, came in early when the project load was heavy. I noticed things other people didn't, because I was often the only one there to notice them. 6 months into my current position, I became aware of a colleague named Kim Ji-yeon. She sat at a workstation about 8 meters from mine across an open floor plan. She arrived before me every morning, which was early, maybe 7:15 a.m., and she was still there when I left, which was often 10 p.m. or later. In the months I worked alongside her, I never saw her take a lunch break. I never saw her eat anything. I rarely heard her speak. She printed a great deal. I want to be clear that none of this struck me as alarming. Some people work very hard, some people eat at their desks, and I wasn't always watching. I noted her as a diligent colleague and moved on. What made me start keeping records was the printer. Our office floor has 2 printers. One is shared and central, one is near the kitchenette and slightly faster. I noticed that Kim Ji-yeon exclusively used the central printer, never the fast one. This is a small thing, but when you work in the same space for 6 months, you notice the small things. I started timing my own print jobs to avoid overlapping with hers. In doing so, I started checking the printer queue. Her employee badge ID appeared on the queue almost daily, consistent, methodical. The print jobs were always work-related, claim summaries, compliance checklists, nothing unusual. In the 7th month, HR sent a floor-wide email about updated access permissions, routine update. I processed mine without thinking about it, and then because it was 11 p.m. and I had nothing else to read, I pulled up the full access log for our floor. Her badge ID had been deactivated 6 months ago. A note in the system said, "Transfer Busan branch." She had transferred the month before I joined. I checked the printer logs. Her badge ID was on them. Every day I had been in the office, her print jobs logging normally outputting to the central printer, time-stamped and accounted for. I sat with that information for about 20 minutes. Then I looked across the open floor plan to her workstation. Empty, clean. The kind of clean a desk gets when it has been cleared and not touched in months. I went to the other late-staying colleagues, 3 of them at that point, and I described her. I said, "The woman at that workstation, does anyone know where she's been?" Every one of them looked at me slightly puzzled and said they didn't know anyone who worked at that station. One of them said the station had been empty since before Christmas. It was now July. I requested the security footage for our floor, not for the whole 6 months, just 1 week, covering a period when I clearly remembered seeing Kim Ji-yeon printing. What I expected to see was a woman I had somehow misidentified, a different colleague using the same general area. What the footage showed was me alone arriving at 7:15, me working me at approximately the times I remembered interacting with her, looking up, nodding, once stepping to the side to let her pass in a narrow space between 2 filing cabinets, doing those things, looking up at nothing, nodding at nothing, nodding at nothing, stepping sideways in an empty corridor. The one detail that I cannot make fit any explanation I have tried. On the footage on 13 separate mornings, the elevator door opens and I step forward, reach out and hold the door. Then I step back. Then I walk to my desk. The elevator door opening mechanism shows the door held open for approximately 4 seconds on each of those occasions. The elevator was empty when I held it. I have the printer logs, the access records, and the footage all saved. I've shown the footage to 2 people. Both of them watched the elevator sequence and then stopped asking questions. I still work the late shift. I still use the central printer. But I check the queue now before I send anything. I check whose badge ID is ahead of mine. So far, it's always just mine. Whatever was using the bolt, my aunt left me a farmhouse in Perthshire when she died. I'm grateful for it. I want to say that first. It's a good house, stone walls, low ceilings, a wood stove that works properly. I moved in last spring and I've been making it my own. The back door started bolting itself in the night sometime in June. I noticed it because I would come down in the morning and find the bolt across, and I live alone, and I knew I hadn't done it. I assumed I was doing it in my sleep. I know that sounds odd, but sleepwalking runs in my family, and it felt like a more comfortable explanation than the other options. I put a camera on the door, small one, motion activated, angled at the bolt. It triggered at 2:47 a.m. on the second night. I watched the footage in the morning. The bolt slides. A hand is visible at the edge of the frame for just under 2 seconds. The motion is deliberate. The bolt goes across cleanly and the hand withdraws. I don't want to describe the hand in detail. I've tried a few times, and I stop before I get to the second joint. There is something wrong with how many there are. What I can tell you is that after that footage I started thinking back to the first weeks in the house, before the bolting started, before I noticed, and I remembered the mud. I'd found mud tracks inside the back door 3 or 4 times in May. I thought I'd tracked it in myself. The tracks went from the door to the foot of my bed and back out. I cleaned them. I didn't think much of it. Once the bolt started going across at night, the track stopped. Whatever was bolting the door was keeping something out. It was keeping something out that had been coming inside before. I had the footboard of the bed checked by a carpenter last autumn. He found tooth marks on the wood. He asked when I'd gotten a dog. I told him I don't have a dog. He looked at the marks for a moment and then he put his tools away and charged me for only half the visit and left early. I keep the bolt on during the day now too. Both bolts. It doesn't stop what I sometimes hear outside at night, but nothing has come in. Floor 9. Okay, so I'm going to tell this the way it happened, which means it's going to sound stupid at first, because I thought it was stupid at first. I'm 17. I live with my family in an apartment building in Dhari, which is a neighborhood in Mumbai. Big building, 2 lifts, a lot of families, the kind of place where everybody sort of knows everybody by face, even if you don't talk much. There's a man who takes the lift at the same time as me every morning. I leave for school at 7:10. Always there, already waiting or just arriving. Maybe 50 years old, I'd guess. Office clothes. Gray and white checked shirt a lot of the time. He always presses 9, I press 11. He gets off before me. He always gives me this small nod, the same one before the doors open on his floor. This went on for a few months before I even thought anything of it. He was just a neighbor. The building has 20-odd floors. I don't know everyone. Then I mentioned him to Mrs. Till, who lives next door to us and has lived in the building since basically forever. She is the person who knows everything about everyone. I said the man who lives on 9, the one in the checked shirt who takes the lift at 7. She said she didn't know who I was describing. She said there were 3 families on 9 and she knew all of them, and none of them had a man matching that description. I thought she was just forgetting someone. I let it go. A few weeks later, I actually started paying attention on 9. I hadn't been watching before. You stand in a lift and you look at the doors. You don't watch where people go. But the next few times he was in the lift with me, I watched he got out on 9. He turned right. And then the doors closed and I couldn't see anymore. There are 4 apartments on floor 9. 2 go left, 2 go right. I knocked on both right side doors on a Saturday afternoon and introduced myself as a neighbor doing a building survey for school. Both residents answered. Neither of them recognized the description. Both of them had lived there for years. I mentioned it to my older sister, who thought I was being paranoid. She said I was bad with faces and was probably mixing him up with someone from a different floor. But that same week, I was in the lift with him and I watched the panel the whole time. He reached past me and pressed 9. I watched his hand press the button. The button lit up. When I got the security footage for that morning, the building manager is a friend of my father's, and he helped me. The footage showed me in the lift alone. I pressed 11. 9 lit up too, and I'm standing there in the camera not touching the panel. The doors opened on 9 and I stepped back against the wall. The doors stayed open for about 5 seconds, the full hold time, and then closed. On the footage I look completely normal. I step back. I wait. The doors close. I go up to 11. I don't remember stepping back. I wait. The doors close. I go up to 11. I don't remember stepping back. I don't remember giving anything room to pass. I showed the footage to Mrs. Patil. She watched it twice. Then she asked me if I press close door or hold open very often. I said, I don't know. I don't think so. She said, check how many times the lift camera shows you holding the doors on 9. I haven't looked yet. I'm not trying to be dramatic about it. I just haven't been able to make myself do it. I still take that lift every morning. I'm trying to pay attention to whether I step back. I'm trying to notice if my hand moves on its own. So far, I can't tell, and I think that's actually the part that bothers me most. Seven tonight. That's a lot of ordinary situations that turned out not to be. I keep thinking about the grandmother's diary, about her figuring it out, the wave, the sequence, the fact that it had to watch long enough to learn, which means it was patient, which means it was waiting, which means it had decided to wait before she ever noticed. Take care of yourselves. Notice the small things, and if something in tonight's stories landed closer than you expected, leave a comment. We read every one. Good night.